In a matter of weeks, the United States experienced a sequence of events many described as deeply unsettling, difficult to absorb all at once. Off the coast of Texas and Louisiana, a massive roll cloud stretching for dozens of miles appeared suddenly, sweeping across the sky like a living structure in motion. It was not a hurricane, it was not a tornado, yet it caused thousands to stop and look upward in silence. At Racetrack Playa in California, stones weighing hundreds of pounds began sliding across the dry lakebed with no visible force acting upon them. No people, no animals, only long trails carved into the earth, silent proof that the ground itself was not entirely still. In the midst of a severe winter, as lakes froze solid, enormous slabs of ice were driven ashore by sustained winds, stacking into walls taller than a person. Homes were partially buried. Roads were blocked. Everything unfolded gradually, yet with a force that could not be resisted. These events were different expressions of nature, but they shared one common thread. The stability we depend on is being tested. If you believe these events may be signs calling us back to God, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel as we examine them through the lens of faith in Scripture. That morning off the coast of Texas and Louisiana, there were no obvious warning signs. It was not a typical storm front. Its shape was sharply defined, a thick cylindrical roll stretching unbroken across the sky. Later satellite imagery and observer estimates suggested the structure extended for dozens, possibly even hundreds, of miles. What stood out most was its separation. It was entirely detached from surrounding cloud cover. There was no dense storm system trailing behind it. No clear indication of a larger weather disturbance accompanying it. The underside appeared darker, giving it a heavy, dense presence. From a distance, it looked like a massive boundary dividing the sky in two. As it moved closer, its rounded structure became more distinct, and many witnesses described it as resembling a giant wheel slowly rotating overhead. Its movement was not chaotic. It advanced steadily, maintaining its form as it moved inland. As it approached, people reported subtle yet noticeable environmental changes. The air grew unusually heavy and still. Sunlight shifted to a silvery gray or pale yellow tone, casting an unfamiliar hue across the landscape. Then, as the cloud passed overhead, winds intensified briefly. There was no immediate downpour. No tornado formed at that moment. What unsettled residents was not instant destruction. It was the abnormal nature of the event. This was not a common sight under conditions forecasted as stable. Within hours, images and videos of the roll cloud spread across social media. From multiple perspectives, its structure appeared consistent and continuous, increasing public fascination. Meteorologists identified it as a roll cloud, a type of atmospheric solitary wave. It forms when pressure waves interact with high humidity in a stable temperature inversion layer. A simple way to understand it is as a ripple moving through a stable layer of air. Similar to the wave created when a stone drops into water, except in this case, the water is the atmosphere itself. Scientifically, the phenomenon has an explanation. It does not necessarily signal a major storm or imminent disaster. Yet what caused many to pause was its magnitude and cohesion. A cloud formation stretching hundreds of miles, maintaining its structure while moving, is enough to leave observers unsettled. In an era marked by increasingly unpredictable weather patterns, events like this easily create a sense of warning, not because they cause immediate devastation, but because they reveal how quickly atmospheric conditions can shift in unfamiliar ways. For those who study Scripture, the image of a massive rolling cloud recalls passages describing the presence of God in the clouds. Whether viewed scientifically or spiritually, the event underscored a simple truth. Nature can display its power unexpectedly, and humanity cannot always anticipate how or when. When a formation of that scale appears overhead, under seemingly ordinary conditions, it reminds us that the stability we rely upon can change more quickly than we assume. After the sky rolled overhead, many dismissed it as a passing atmospheric event. But while attention remained fixed upward, the ground beneath was telling a quieter story, quieter, yet equally unsettling. At Racetrack Playa, a dry lake bed deep inside Death Valley National Park, massive stones weighing hundreds of pounds had moved. Not overturned, not shattered, simply moved. Some stones, weighing more than 700 pounds, had rested undisturbed for decades on the flat, hardened surface. Then suddenly they were no longer in their original positions. Behind them stretched long trails etched into cracked earth, some extending for dozens of yards like tracks pressed into dried clay. There were no footprints, no animal tracks, no tire marks, only stones and the paths they left behind. For over a century, this phenomenon puzzled scientists. Then, on a rare winter night not long ago, conditions led to deeper investigation. Temperatures dropped unusually low. A thin layer of water that had pooled across the lake bed froze into a nearly invisible sheet of ice. Time-lapse cameras installed to monitor the conditions recorded the night. No humans entered the frame. No animals passed through. Wind speeds were minimal. Yet in 5 separate locations, hundreds of feet apart, 5 massive stones began to move, almost simultaneously. They did not jerk forward dramatically. They slid slowly and deliberately, leaving clear trails as if guided by an unseen force. One moved straight, another shifted slightly off course, a third veered gently, as if encountering subtle resistance. What unsettled researchers was the synchronization. If wind was responsible, why did they begin moving at nearly the same time? If melting ice during daylight caused it, why did movement occur while it was still dark? The prevailing explanation suggests that on cold nights, thin ice sheets form around the rocks. As temperatures shift, the ice fractures into large panels, and even light winds can push these panels across slick mud, dragging stones with them. The mechanism has been replicated under controlled conditions. Yet footage showing movement at night raises subtler questions. Not whether rocks can move, but about timing and coordination. When 5 stones weighing hundreds of pounds begin sliding across a silent lake bed at nearly the same moment under minimal wind, observers do not simply see physics. They feel something shift. A primal awareness that something normally fixed has moved. The ground is considered the most stable element of our world. It does not roll like clouds. It does not surge like waves. It stands firm. It is foundation. But at Racetrack Playa, the foundation did not remain still. The stones seemed to trace their own paths, slowly, steadily, without a visible hand. And if the sky can roll like a colossal wheel and stones can glide without visible force, then the deeper question is not whether science offers explanations. The deeper question is this: why are the very things we consider immovable, the sky above and the ground below, moving in ways that compel us to reconsider our sense of security? When stones begin to travel, perhaps what shifts is not only their position on the earth, but our confidence in permanence. After the sky and the shifting ground, winter across parts of the northern United States took another troubling turn. Temperatures plunged for days. Lakes froze thick and solid. Residents were accustomed to harsh winters, yet that season the cold persisted longer than expected, accompanied by unusually strong, sustained winds. Then what many later called an ice tsunami began. At first, residents heard unusual sounds from the lake, deep cracking and grinding. When they looked outside, they saw massive sheets of ice moving, not melting, not scattering, but advancing as solid slabs. Strong winds pushed steadily across the frozen surface, building pressure. Ice sheets several inches thick and stretching hundreds of yards began pressing toward the shoreline. They moved slowly but relentlessly. When the ice reached shore, it did not stop. Pressure from behind continued. Slabs compressed, fractured into large blocks, and piled atop one another. In a short time, walls of ice taller than a purse formed along the waterfront. Some lakeside homes were partially buried. Fences collapsed. Decks and small structures sustained heavy damage. Roads closed as ice spilled onto pavement. Although slower than an ocean tsunami, and fortunately causing no major loss of life, the property damage was significant. Scientifically, an ice tsunami occurs when several factors align: a large frozen surface, sustained strong winds, the inertia of massive ice sheets, and compression as those sheets reach land. When these elements converge, enormous quantities of ice can be driven inland. What unsettled many was not the physics, but the scale and timing. The event occurred amid increasingly extreme weather patterns: thicker ice than usual, stronger winds than forecasted, Individual factors that might seem manageable, when combined, created a force communities were unprepared for. When people saw ice, something meant to remain still, advancing onto land, they asked a natural question. If wind and ice can generate such force under the right conditions, what happens when those conditions intensify? This was more than a rare winter anomaly. It was a reminder that nature, under certain circumstances, can shift from stable to forceful quickly. And when it does, response time is limited. When we reflect on these recent upheavals, from rolling skies to shifting stones to rising walls of ice, the central issue is not fear. The central issue is response. Scripture tells of a moment when Jesus and his disciples were in a boat as a fierce storm arose. Waves crashed so violently they feared for their lives while Jesus slept. In panic, they woke him. "Teacher, don't you care that we are perishing?" Mark 4:38. Jesus rose, rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Immediately there was calm. The story is not only about calming storms, it reveals something deeper. The storm outside often exposes the storm within. The disciples had walked with him daily, yet when waves rose, fear overtook them. He asked, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Perhaps we are not so different. When the world feels unstable, when headlines accumulate and nature behaves unexpectedly, our instinct is often panic or indifference. Scripture calls us to neither. It calls us to trust. A man living near a lake where ice began pushing inland heard reports of advancing slabs. Before stepping outside, he gathered his wife and children, and they prayed together. Only afterward did they prepare. When asked why, he said, "I cannot control the wind. I cannot control the ice. But I can place my family in the hands of the one who controls it all." That is not weakness, that is courage. Psalm 46, 1-2 declares, "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way." The Bible does not deny that the earth can give way. It does not deny storms. It reminds us there is a foundation that does not move. Perhaps these events were not meant to frighten, but to awaken, to stir us from distraction, to remind us not to anchor our confidence solely in material stability. Jesus said that whoever hears his words and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house upon the rock. Consider a city surrounded by massive stone walls. For generations, its people believed no force could penetrate them. They trusted their gates, their storehouses, their guards. On the eastern wall stood a watchman named Eliab. Gray-haired and weathered, he had stood watch for 40 years. While others talked, he listened. One moonless night, he sensed a subtle shift. Not footsteps, not clashing metal, just a faint vibration carried on the wind. The next morning, he told the elders. They smiled politely. The city had known peace for decades. But in the following nights, the vibration grew slightly stronger. Remembering the warning that a watchman who fails to sound the alarm bears responsibility, Eliab prayed for clarity. He did not want panic, but he could not ignore what he sensed. Finally, he rang the bronze bell. Lamps ignited across the city. Soldiers rushed to position. The elders climbed the wall in frustration until flames appeared along the horizon. An army was advancing under cover of darkness. Because the alarm had been sounded early, the gates were secured. The attack was repelled before dawn. The next morning, the sky was clear. But the people understood something new. Warnings do not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes they come as subtle shifts, noticed only by those who remain watchful. Strong walls may guard the body, but spiritual discernment guards the soul. When the bell rings in the night, what matters most is not who rang it, but whether we are willing to wake up.